In October of 1965, police in Indianapolis made a discovery so horrifying that even seasoned officers struggled to comprehend it. In the basement of a modest home, they found the tortured, lifeless body of a teenage girl. Her name was Sylvia Likens. To this day, her murder is remembered as one of the most shocking and disturbing crimes in American history, not because it was committed by a faceless stranger, but because it was carried out inside a family home with neighbors and children complicit. This is the story of Sylvia Likens, a tragedy that reveals how ordinary people can become monsters when cruelty festers unchecked. Sylvia Marie Likens was born on January 3, 1949, in Lebanon, Indiana. She was the third of 5 children to Lester and Betty Likens, carnival workers, who often struggled to provide stability for their kids. To make ends meet, Sylvia's parents would frequently travel with the carnival circuit, leaving their children in the care of relatives or trusted acquaintances. Despite the instability, Sylvia was remembered as a sweet, shy teenager. At 16 years old, she had long brown hair, a warm smile, and a quiet nature. She was protective of her younger sister, Jenny, who suffered from polio and walked with a limp. Friends described Sylvia as polite, gentle, and kind-hearted, someone who avoided conflict and tried to see the good in people. But it was this trust, and her parents' desperate need for help, that placed Sylvia and Jenny in the care of a woman who would become their executioner, Gertrude Baniszewski. Gertrude Nadine Baniszewski was a 37-year-old single mother of 7 children. On the surface, she seemed like the type of woman who could be trusted. But behind closed doors, Gertrude's life was marked by poverty, illness, and bitterness. She suffered from chronic health problems, depression, and a deep resentment toward the world. When Lester and Betty Likens met Gertrude through their daughter Paula, they thought they had found a safe arrangement. They agreed to pay Gertrude $20 a week to board Sylvia and Jenny while they worked the carnival circuit. It seemed reasonable enough. At first, the arrangement appeared to work. But when the weekly payments from Sylvia's parents came late, Gertrude's simmering anger began to turn toward the girls. What started as small punishments would soon spiral into unimaginable cruelty. At first, the abuse seemed like strict discipline. Gertrude would slap Sylvia for minor things, like eating too much food or speaking out of turn. But as weeks passed, her violence escalated. She began to single out Sylvia as the target of her rage. Jealous of Sylvia's looks and envious of her youth, Gertrude spread false rumors about her. She accused Sylvia of being promiscuous, of spreading diseases, and of corrupting her own daughters. Soon Gertrude's children joined in, encouraged by their mother. And it didn't stop there. The neighborhood kids, some as young as 10, were invited into the house to participate in Sylvia's torment. What happened over the next 3 months was nothing short of psychological and physical torture. Sylvia was beaten daily with belts, burned with cigarettes, starved, and humiliated in front of others. At one point, she was forced to strip naked and endure ridicule while being accused of being pregnant. Gertrude's cruelty was methodical. She orchestrated the abuse like a game, making her own children and others complicit, while Jenny, crippled and terrified, was powerless to intervene. By October, the abuse had escalated to a level that defies comprehension. Gertrude locked Sylvia in the basement, cutting her off from sunlight, food, and basic humanity. There, Sylvia was tied up, beaten, and left to languish in her own filth. Sometimes, she was forced to eat leftovers out of a dog's bowl. Other times, she was denied water, left begging for even a sip to quench her thirst. One of the most chilling details was the way Gertrude turned Sylvia's suffering into a spectacle. Neighborhood children came and went, sometimes participating in the abuse, sometimes simply watching as if it were entertainment. In one instance, Sylvia was forced to insert a Coke bottle into herself, a humiliation that left her both physically injured and emotionally destroyed. But the cruelty didn't end there. In one of the most infamous acts of the case, Gertrude and her children took a heated needle and branded Sylvia's stomach with the words, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it." Sylvia begged for mercy. She prayed for help, but none came. By late October, Sylvia's body was broken. She was malnourished, covered in sores and bruises, and barely able to move. Still, the abuse continued. On October 26, 1965, Sylvia attempted to escape. She tried to run out the front door, but Gertrude caught her and threw her down the stairs. That fall would prove to be the final blow. 2 days later, on October 26th, Sylvia collapsed, barely conscious, She reportedly whispered, "I'm going to die. I can tell." Hours later, she succumbed to her injuries in the basement of the Baniszewski home. She was just 16 years old. When police were finally called, the scene was almost too much to bear. Sylvia's emaciated body bore the marks of months of torture, burns, bruises, cuts, and that haunting message carved into her skin. Officers who responded to the scene later said it was the most disturbing case they had ever encountered. The investigation quickly revealed the horrifying truth. Gertrude Baniszewski, her children, and several neighborhood kids were all implicated in Sylvia's death. The details of the trial shocked the nation. The prosecution laid bare the horrors Sylvia endured: the systematic abuse, the branding, the starvation, the humiliation. Witnesses testified about how Gertrude encouraged her children and others to hurt Sylvia, making cruelty a daily ritual. Gertrude was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Her daughter Paula was convicted of second-degree murder, while other children received lesser charges. Astonishingly, many of the neighborhood kids who participated received little to no punishment. Their roles minimized despite their active involvement. The trial was widely covered, with newspapers calling it the single worst crime perpetrated against an individual in Indiana's history. For Jenny Likens, Sylvia's younger sister, the trauma lasted a lifetime. She testified against Gertrude in court and later lived with the haunting memory of being unable to save her sister. In interviews, Jenny described Sylvia as her protector, the one who always looked out for her. Losing her in such a horrific way left scars that never fully healed. Gertrude Baniszewski served 20 years before being released on parole in 1985. Her release sparked outrage across Indiana, with many believing she should have never been freed. She died of lung cancer in 1990. But the legacy of Sylvia Likens lives on not only as a reminder of how cruel humans can be, but also as a cautionary tale about community responsibility. Neighbors knew something was wrong. Children spoke of what happened in that house. Yet few intervened until it was far too late. The murder of Sylvia Likens stands as one of the most disturbing examples of collective cruelty. It wasn't a lone killer hiding in the shadows. It was an entire household, and even parts of a neighborhood, that turned a blind eye or actively joined in the abuse. Psychologists often point to this case as an example of de-individuation, the loss of personal responsibility when cruelty becomes normalized in a group. Like the bystander effect in the Kitty Genovese case, Sylvia's murder forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human behavior. Would we have spoken up if we were neighbors? Would we have called the police? Or would we too have convinced ourselves it wasn't our problem? Sylvia Likens was only 16 years old when her life was stolen in one of the most sadistic crimes in American history. Her story is a haunting reminder that evil doesn't always come from strangers. It can grow inside homes, fueled by silence and fear. So let me ask you, what responsibility do we have when we see signs of abuse or hear cries for help? Do we look away or do we act? Because sometimes a single phone call could mean the difference between life and death.